And then you have this weird thing that happened, I don't know, in the last 6 years. I have no idea how long it's been around for, but this idea that racism is prejudice plus power. If you look up the textbook definition of racism, that's not what it's always been. It seems to have been supplanted by this new definition. So the end result of this, obviously, is that the idea that if you are a person of color, and technically I'm one, I can't be racist. I actually physically can't be racist, which is obviously that's completely bollocks. I mean, it descended to the point where poor Justin Trudeau has been called a white supremacist. I mean, Justin Trudeau, the guy who has been so sympathetic to Syrian refugees and opened this country up, and I mean, you couldn't find, I mean, a bigger heart of a liberal almost in Justin Trudeau, and he's a white supremacist now. So when they call Sargon of Akkad white supremacist, he's basically Justin Trudeau. They're all basically the same. The language that emanates, you know, from a lot of these people who embrace this kind of thought, they're the kind of people that attack Armored Skeptic and Shu, my secular activist friends Faisal and Ali Rizvi, who are ex-Muslim reformers. The simple logical end game of a school of philosophy, which, regardless of the problem it seeks to answer, has found in its answer that everything is the fault of the racist, capitalistic, patriarchal West. Everything in the world now to these people is a problem that's caused by a combination thereof: Western civilization, colonialism, capitalism, racial supremacy, or even worse, Zionism. One of the issues with this logical extension is that now the Enlightenment values is seen to be, because it was a movement that came out of Western civilization seemed to be white. Therefore, championing Enlightenment thought is white supremacy, which is racism. My issue with that is, this is the horseshoe theory. I mean, you can see some similarities between the far left and the far right in terms of their identitarian nature, their love of, I guess, political violence. To the far left, America will never be great because of racism. And to the far right, America will only be great if we return to racism. So the problem is that if we accept the conflation of Western civilization as white nationalism or liberalism as the West, then we're really going to expand the scope of the term alt-right such that it loses all its meaning. So people that stand for Enlightenment values, nowadays the popular term is classical liberals, are now known as racists, alt-righters. That's why, you know, somebody like Sargon, who's a classical liberal, or Dave Rubin is known as a alt-righter, which is completely ridiculous. So this stuff actually happens. When Boston recently had the free speech, I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. Like this idea of anyone that's going to embrace Enlightenment values is now already a neo-Nazi. So the people who are basically advocating for you know the right of people to punch Nazis, like classical liberals, if you hold Enlightenment values now, you are a Nazi. So the fourth issue with why the Enlightenment project stalled is that there has been an alternative model that emerged. One of them is called liberal democracy. So liberalism has been on the rise around the world. Every single freedom indicator in the last 10 years has actually declined. I find this very sad. And you know, this is just some data that shows that global democracy is also a liberalism and democracy, two different things, right? Liberalism is more of an issue of civil liberties. You know, how free are people to do the things that they're entitled to? Democracy is just one person, one vote, and that people vote their government in. So you saw the previous slide, illiberalism is actually on the rise. And now this is the democracy index. It looks like in the last 10 years, democracy is on the decline. So while in the past years, the declines in freedom were generally concentrated among autocracies and dictatorships that simply went from bad to worse. In 2016, the scary trend is that it was actually established democracies, countries that were used to be rated free, that are sliding back. So free countries are now accounting for a larger share of the countries with declines than at any time in the past decade. And nearly 1/4 of those countries registering declines in freedom actually come from Europe. So we're looking at countries like Hungary. So here is the top countries that have seen 10-year declines. This is from Freedom House that actually every year puts out this report trying to track the liberal democracies. It's a liberal democracy index. And you can see a lot of these countries are troubling. Like Turkey has had the biggest decline of any other country, and it's considered a European country. So what is a liberal democracy exactly? Basically, they have the trappings of democracy: voting, fair elections, just without the full array of civil liberties. It's actually a growth industry. 7 years ago, only 22% of democratizing countries could be said to be categorized as such. 5 years ago, it became 35%. And to date, very few illiberal democracies have actually matured into liberal democracies. If anything, they're moving in the opposite direction. They're sort of staying illiberal and getting more illiberal. So classic examples of liberal democracies in the United States, I mean, most of Scandinavia, Europe, Australia. And you have illiberal democracies like Russia. Turkey is a very textbook case now. And my home country of Singapore, where we do vote for the government, but we don't vote for our president. That was recent. But you also don't have these luxuries of freedom of speech. The liberal autocracy, that's a unicorn, because you can't really have high civil liberties, but I mean, it's rare to really find a place that guarantees civil liberties for people, but you can't vote for the government. I mean, this is why democracy is a path to liberalism, right? And autocracy, the classic example is Saddam Hussein, who my friend Faisal looks exactly alike. That's where he's from. He's from Iraq. Here, and the fifth problem also with the Enlightenment is why it's stalling, is that it's actually losing support. And this is very troubling. It's like, in tsunami systems now, or like earthquake systems, they're developing these early tsunami warning systems. And I think one of the early warning systems that democracy isn't really, it's on the decline, is that it's actually losing support. So people, from all these countries that are benefiting from it in the West, young people no longer support the idea of democracy. That's not something that actually they care about, and that's a problem. And then you have this issue. Just this year alone, even last year, you've had issues like the Middlebury College protests, Berkeley, especially Berkeley, which is on fire every now and then because somebody they don't like is speaking there. Or Evergreen State University, where Brett Weinstein, a professor, was basically forced to, he resigned and actually won a huge settlement against the university. But these trends are not isolated. They seem to be happening far more frequently. Nearly half of the millennials actually polled in this was done by University of Chicago. It says that they asked, should colleges limit the freedom of speech in extreme cases? So what is extreme cases? It was actually slurs, racial slurs, or any other slur, or other intentionally offensive language and costumes that stereotype certain racial and ethnic groups. So costumes. So basically, if you wore an Indian outfit or a taco outfit, you could be one of those who millennials actually support restricting the free speech of. My question is, can we actually turn the tide? The reason why I thought it was important to identify, what's stalling the Enlightenment project is so that we can answer, can we save it? Because I think it's worth saving, and I immigrated here because I thought this was the place that I would be able to experience the full panoply of a liberal democracy. In order to really assess the prospects of a new Enlightenment, or at least saving the last one, I think we need to understand more clearly the strengths and weakness of our System 2 thinking. great thinkers of the Enlightenment, they completely dismissed System 1, they completely dismissed intuition, and they treated it as not only non-existent, but also inferior to reason. That is their hubris, and we know better. We can't really work against human nature. We gotta always work with it. It makes achieving goals so much easier. So in light of the new findings, we also have to account for it and not work against it. The communal aspect of religion, right? That's the second thing. Communal aspect of religion is also a strength. And on one hand, it creates a transcendent community. On the other hand, it's basically tribalism writ large. It sort of drives this like wedge between in-group and out-group. But what we do need to figure out is that religions actually do something well. It reminds us, they sort of form this like shared space, shared humanity across races and geographical boundaries. Can there be an enlightenment or a secular version of that in which we can sort of extract the benefits of having a communal, the communal benefits of religion, but without all the crap that comes along with it? The third one is we need to actually improve the PR of the Enlightenment. It is bad out there. And that's partly what I hope all the guys here, all the YouTubers that were invited, I mean, that's one of the things they're doing. Hosts like Dave Rubin, Sam Harris. These are guys that are actually pushing back on this West is white nonsense, right? We can no longer deny Western countries, I think, the civic nationalism. There's a very big difference between civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. Ethnic nationalism is, the desire to keep America white. But civic nationalism is the idea of institutions that are formed from Enlightenment values, and that we cannot be ashamed of those values, because what happens when America is ashamed of those values to countries like the ones I grew up in, where now, authoritarian governments can say, aha, you see, like, even the West doesn't defend those systems anymore. Why should we? Why should we even go there? The failure also of extremely responsible actors to address widely held concerns about things like borders and sovereignty, non-assimilation of some communities, it really helped a lot of more extreme political actors fill that vacuum. If we conflate every single iteration of nationalism with racism, it's completely counterproductive to the Enlightenment project. We must defend the Western tradition, but not let the term Western turn into a slur. And that's almost the brilliance of a lot of the social justice movement. Thank you. And postmodernism needs to be reputed from the inside, from within the heart of the academies. It presents a threat not only to liberal democracy, but to modernity itself. You can see how politics is becoming far more irrational and identitarian. It's very, very unnerving. We can retain the postmodernist film and everything. I think the art, in my opinion alone, the art needs to go. The next thing, defend liberty. Liberalism is defined by a commitment to liberty. And at root, it is a concept that is grounded on the individual. The problem is that there are movements now that want to grant rights to groups instead of individuals. That's what Nazism is, communism is, Antifa wants to do that. It's also the goal of ISIS. It's the infidels and the non-infidels. So it's group-based politics. It is the freedom to be all that one is, to actually actualize the fullness of your potential as a human being endowed with the capacity for self-actualization, right? And we want to uphold that. Instead of encouraging us to rest easy in the assurance that liberalism will certainly triumph, a conception of liberty based on human dignity recognizes that there is nothing inevitable about its success. While each of us may wish to be free as an individual, it shows that individual freedom is dependent on us and all of us being free. And that means that we need to find some form of shared humanity. The next one is to be completely cognizant of all the illiberal forces. I sort of talked about a few already. And the last one, which is very depressing, is the millennials. Like, we have to focus on making sure that the younger people are actually valuing Enlightenment values and they don't fall prey to the kind of postmodernist thought that's infecting the academia right now. So, my conclusion, it's the state of the Enlightenment right now. It's a little depressing, but I don't think it's dead. I don't think freedom is dead. It's just being tested. And that, one of the things that is a direct consequence of living in a free society is that we have to be completely vigilant at all times. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you.